Welcome guys, gals and non-binary pals to this week's episode of Buffy Boys, your weekly review of Buffy the Vampire Slayer from a queer, literary and feminist perspective. My name is Joel, I'm one of your hosts. With me as always is your other fictitious host,
Brian. Hi, how's it going?
I was hoping you'd say nothing there. And I think I have only, well, funny / terrifying would be if it turned out that I was the only person here the whole time.
As in
Every reveal.
You found out for yourself that essentially you have been having like one-sided conversations where there's just swathes of like blank noise in every episode.
Yeah, Garfield without Garfield. And I think in this example, you're Garfield.
Oh no, I think if either of us is Garfield, I think it's you. Yeah, I think it's you. If we're Calvin and Hobbes, which one of us is Calvin and which one of us is Hobbes? You haven't read a huge amount of Calvin and Hobbes.
I think you're both kind of like the parents or something, or or a snowball.
You can be Susie.
Susie's a real prig though, isn't she?
No, if you read it now, she's just like a sensible and nice kid who's quite smart and very intelligent. And
Calvin needs a diagnosis of some sort.
And unfortunately is in love with this absolute little shithead. Yeah. I love Calvin.
Maybe I am so Susie.
Yeah. I heard that. So
we are here on Buffy Boys to talk about season 7, episode 12 of Buffy the Vampire Slayer, Potential.
Yeah. And I will potentially give you a Buffy summary.
Ho ho.
So this episode was directed by James A. Contner, who last directed Same Time, Same Place. It was written by Rebecca Rand Kirshner, who last wrote Help, and it was first aired on January the 21st, 2003. And here is your Buffy Ann summary. A spell to identify potential seemed to indicate Dawn, who is ambivalent. Actually, it indicates Amanda, her schoolmate, who exhibits Slayer-like abilities when the two of them are attacked in the school. Xander consoles Dawn with the virtues of ordinariness. I think that is one of the worst ones in a long time in terms of
super sparse as well.
It just there's no structure to it. It was like a spell indicates Dawn as what,
and there's no potentials in this episode.
Yeah,
either,
apparently not, except for Amanda. Okay, so for our bronze banter this week, we have again we haven't really been focusing on anything too specifically. Oh, you know what else we were watching is You. Which I hadn't thought about. But yeah, we haven't been focusing on anything too specifically, or watching anything.
We've been having a sampler of various things, as we oft-times do.
That's it. And I mean, we've both been playing, like, you've been playing tons of Disco Elysium, which you've been loving, I do believe. Mm-hmm. And I've been playing. Go on.
It's made me sad, and I've liked it.
Oh, tell me about that.
It's an incredibly melancholy game. You know, you just want to like sit into like a warm jumper of a game sometimes.
Yeah. I've been playing a bunch of Binding of Isaac Repentance, which is I really like playing Binding of Isaac, which is a roguelike game, roguelike game that was released in like, it's been out forever, but it's addictive and stupid and fun.
How many hours do you reckon you played?
Like 100, I think. But they released a final DLC for it, which is called Repentance, and it completely changes the whole game, and I'm quite enjoying it. And it came out for Switch last week, which is really cool. And you know what I've been doing loads of? Is listening to lots of ska music. Specifically lots of Streetlight Manifesto, who I remember I used to, like, one of my friends in secondary school had, like, he was reasonably punky, and he quite liked punk music, and I was like, oh, you know, I was kind of more into the kind of post-rock and hardcore and like good emo, like Sunday Day Real Estate. But he was really into punk and ska music, and he really liked Streetlight Manifesto, and I was like, meh, I don't care. And I'm like, I was wrong, because Streetlight Manifesto are really good, or certainly their first album is, which I don't know the name of, but it's just one song, and it's really really good. Anyway, I've been thinking about it all week, and I've been listening to it constantly. I've been on my walks with Ludo. Anyway, but I'm really regretful. I had suggested we could watch a movie called Titan. Or actually, let me just check that if it is called Titan. I think it is. Yeah, Titan, by which directed by Julia Dacournau, which is I think she's Belgian potentially. Anyway, the movie's in French, but it's a body horror movie. Apparently, it's fascinating and kind of funny and weird and disgusting. But it just won the Palme d'Or, it won the Palme d'Or this year. And that would have been great to talk about. So maybe next week when we watch it up at that point.
Yeah,
talk about it.
Absolutely.
Anyway,
pre-watch it and see if you like it as well.
That's it. Yeah. What we have been watching, however, is a bunch of stuff. For example, we have watched a couple episodes of a TV show which escaped us at the time, but I think it escaped most people, which is called Los Spookies. Do you want to tell us about it, Joe?
Yeah, absolutely. So little bit of a circuitous route to this, but essentially we were watching Shrill, which is a TV show we've talked about before, and there was a minor character in that played by an actor called Julio Torres, who is a Salvadorian writer and comedian who is written for Saturday Night Live. And from this, I was like, I really enjoyed him. He was like a camp gay hairdresser, but really entertaining. So I Wikipedia'd him. I found that he'd done a show called Los Spookies alongside Anna Fabriga and Fred Armisian, who were kind of the co-writers, co-stars.
Armisen? I've been saying Fred Armisian for years and years and years. I think it's just Armisen.
It might be. I might just be copying your pronunciation. I think every time I say his name, I thought of Armin Tamzarian of The Simpsons. Yeah. But they've co-written this show, and it aired its first season in June of 2019 on HBO. And I think you claimed to me that it had been...
It's renewed for a second season, but it's been perpetually delayed, partially due to the pandemic and partially due to other things. Yeah. I think that there wasn't a huge viewership for it, but the idea behind it is it's a group of people creating these horror situations, but a group of friends, and they're kind of doing things like the second episode is them doing a haunted house to scare off people who potentially will inherit a bunch of money from a person in a will. And the first episode is them recreating a what do you call those things?
Quinceañera?
No, an exorcism.
Oh, sorry. There is a quinceañera in the episode as well.
Yeah, but anyway, and it's mostly just it's very funny dialogue. Extremely.
It's a fully realized world. Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's a little gem. It's only, I think it's 6 episodes. Yeah. It's a group of friends who are horror, essentially horror technicians. Lost ex spookies. I was going to say the Lost ex spookies, as if that wasn't a contradiction in terms. And it's we're trying to figure out where it's set, and I've looked it up, and it's actually a fictional, dream-like Latin American country where the spiritual stuff kind of is also real. So it's meant to be unclear exactly where it's happening.
And there's some of the structural stuff does happen with English language. So it's some of this feels like it's happening in LA, and they haven't really explained that, and maybe that's part of the thing.
And the majority of the dialogue is in Spanish,
95%.
95%. And whenever there is English, it's subtitled in Spanish, which is enjoyable because it's very immersive in terms of the tone of it. And I think it's something I really feel like there's a touch of there's definitely cultural traditions and television traditions here that I'm not super familiar with, which I like.
There's definitely a touch of telenovela, and obviously any Spanish or any Central or South American TV shows will get compared at some point to telenovelas.
Yeah, a man who is seeing one Spanish language property getting real telenovela vibes off of this. Yeah, but I think it is true.
I think there's a touch of that in terms of just the kind of the slightly campy drama to it.
Yeah,
and only slightly campy, and it's genuine and funny, and there's a Phoebe character in it, which I really appreciate.
It's just genuinely funny and weird, but not trying to be shock factor. And and I also think that
Lorne Michaels produces it as well, which I think is usually a reasonably good indication. I think he did Broad City as well. And
I think a couple of the leagues are pretty cute as well. So worth checking out. And short, as I always like to recommend short.
Me too. Another thing we were watching was we've started watching The Amazing World of Gumball, which is a classic Cartoon Network. I think it started in 2015.
It's one of these fantastic things about these kind of cartoon shows because it is both something which starting in 2011 as a short premiered in 2015 and is still on the air, so it kind of do you know what I mean? It's neither something of the then or the now.
It's very much like Steven Universe, which felt like it was a new thing for the entirety of its run, even though it ran from 2012 until 2000 fucking years. But it's just a stupid, ridiculous slapstick, visually incredible kids show. Which I can't remember how I got into it. Actually, I think I do know how I got into it. I think I was watching an Anthony Fantano who does the Needle Drop on YouTube, who generally has a decent taste in music, but also seems to can sometimes come across a bit of a wanker. Though there was a huge suggestion a couple of years ago that he was alt-right and just properly kind of Pepe Hands or just awful alt-right guy, and he was no, I'm really not. And he isn't, he really does champion queer voices and women often, which is great. But and his wife is black as well, which I always think obviously that's not
a limiting factor necessary. Well,
100%. Like, I mean, like, obviously you can be hugely racist while being married to a person of color, but like I always think that, like, you know, it's like, well, you know, it's
less likely.
It is. I think it probably makes it statistically less likely that you're like a rampant alt-right racist if you are married to a black
fair to say. I think that's
as a white man, because he's white, and that's stupid of me to have not specified that. But I think he was ranking all Cartoon Network shows, and he ranked this really highly, and I was like, oh, I'll check it out. But also there was a really fascinating trailer released by Cartoon Network last week called Learn with Pibby. Mm-hmm. And it was just looked like a short film, and it was basically collecting all sorts of like Cartoon Network characters over the years, including kind of your Hanna-Barbera stuff. Mm. So
Hanna-Barbera, I think.
Barbera, yeah. She got so much done in the 60s. It was amazing.
Her and Sherry Fitzgerald.
Yeah, exactly. But in like, so like the Flintstones are in it, but it's essentially this character who seems to accidentally like fall into an apocalypse of fourth wall breaking, terrifying stuff where within this cartoon that she exists, the walls start to break down and her friend gets eaten by the black goo that is consuming everything, and it's her and a bunch of different characters fighting it, and it gets like really bloody, like gristly bloody, like very quickly, and it's actually, like, while it's being produced by a Cartoon Network-ish team, it's being released on Adult Swim, or it was an Adult Swim short, but Adult Swim obviously is the adult
and this
hand of Cartoon Network.
Learn with Pibby, is that what I'm pronouncing?
Learn with Pibby, yeah.
So it looks interesting. It hasn't come out yet. Definitely, if you describe something which is like fourth wall breaking cartoon that crosses over different properties, could be terrible. Looks like it's actually quite nightmarish in a way. And I think why we make the connection here is it shares DNA with the show we start watching, which is Gumball, which is what we haven't mentioned is specifically all the characters in this cartoon ensemble are deliberately like disjointed in terms of clearly taken from different animation styles, different I've heard that the creator, a lot of the main characters are failed or characters from failed pitches he has made for other styles and other shows. So because there's a real sense of like controlled chaos, but also just like what holds the show together, endearing and like funny and like kind of like queer and kind of like there's a lot of innuendo that isn't kind of on the nose, you know, but yeah, it's a nice little diversion which we've enjoyed. We said we talked about Star Trek Prodigy, but I think let's leave that till next week. I'll leave a breadcrumb, which is Prodigy is was originally new Star Trek show, cartoon show developed for Nickelodeon, I think, originally, and now airing on CBS, and aimed to introduce kids into the Star Trek universe, and really enjoyed it so far.
And has Kate Mulgrew, who voicing in it as
a version of Captain Janeway, as she was in her captaincy years.
Visually incredible.
So
we'll talk about it next week.
So speaking of strong female leagues, easy transition. In this episode of Buffy, we have, I think, what we would arguably call, I think we can happily call very Dawn-centric episode potential.
Yeah, I would say one of the like 3 Dawn-centric episodes in total. I think probably the last one as well, in the sense that it's like I can't think of any Dawn-centric episodes after this. I don't think him is necessarily Dawn-centric, though I think it's a little bit Dawn-centric. Obviously Real Me is very Dawn-centric, which is the first one that Dawn properly appears in, and she kind of narrates and stuff. Definitely a Dawn-centric episode. And you know, like, the more I watch Buffy the Vampire Slayer, the more I'm like, you all hate Dawn because she's a young girl and she's acting like a young girl and not like an adult, the way that the Scoobies acted at the beginning of Buffy, you know, because they were many adults realistically on the show, and that's why people are like, oh, they're acceptable. But like the character who Dawn most acts like in terms of TV is Angela Chase. You know, she has like her passions, she's like sarcastic, she enjoys things, she leans a lot, and she has emotional moments and moments of like just like breaking down crying. Angela
Chase is the angel.
True. Angela Chase from My So-Called Life, which is fucking incredible. And we need to rewatch that, actually.
And like the two very chaotic actors who emerged from that, Jared Leto, I think we're saying, and Claire Danes, who have had just like uncategorizable careers in some ways.
Yeah, I totally agree. Claire Danes is a really bizarre career, but I think she's stunningly talented.
Yeah. Also, very brief aside, Jared Leto is now going to be in the new Morbius superhero film.
Ugh.
Go out and watch the trailer for it.
Yeah.
It is absolutely bonkers, and it is deliberately unclear if it's in the Sony cinematic universe or the MCU.
Yeah.
It looks crazy, and also I believe it will connect into the Blade film, which is coming out as well.
Just bizarre. I don't understand why they're plumbing those depths. They're bad. I really Spider-Man, love him as a character. I just think his enemies tend to be a bit. His rogues gallery tends to be a bit shit, apart from the really obvious ones, and also problematically, the Spider-Man arm of the Marvel universe. Like if you take the Marvel universe, there's a couple of different arms. The primary ones being like Spider-Man, Avengers, and X-Men. X-Men universe, incredible, dark, weird, gay. Avengers, interesting, kind of heroic and stupid. And then Spider-Man, like constant bum notes, and including the Blade stuff, and because the Blade is very much a Spider-Man aligned.
A lot of mystic stuff, and a lot of this whole thing where it was
it wasn't called the Clone Wars, actually. It was called the Clone Saga. Clone Saga. That was bonkers.
And Bix about kind of like how he's actually possessed by the totem spirit of spiders, etc. Anyway, that's for our other podcast, Spidey.
Oh, you know, it's for
Spidey Sons.
No, I was gonna say it's for our other podcast where we pretend to be completely different people, called Spidey Straits.
Okay, I'll take that.
Anyway, so yeah, no, it's definitely Dawn centric, and I appreciate it. I think Dawn is a good character, and we'll get into the conversation she has with Xander in detail later on. But I think that she specifically, I think Michelle Trachtenberg acts particularly well in this episode and handles a lot of emotional nuance, specifically in that conversation and earlier. You know,
no, 100%. I think I'll be saying this for a lot of season 7. I might become a little bit familiar, but I'm not super familiar with this episode. And I thought
it's so funny because this is one of the episodes like I have active memories. I know where I was sitting when I was watching this episode.
And I thought I was surprised by this. I thought this is a good episode. I think that the Dawn stuff is it kind of handled in a slower, more methodical fashion that is akin to an earlier say season 3 episode or something like that, where you're gonna like she has kind of a long time to like work through her stuff, and she has a plot that develops us. Not massively consequential in terms of just her and Amanda, being in a school with a vampire and what that makes her feel about herself, the revelations. And I thought in particular the interesting counterpoint, which we'll come to, is kind of Buffy and Spike training the potentials, but seeing the two fight scenes side by side and cutting back between them, and how Amanda and Dawn are displaying traits which are heroic without necessarily being in this training environment. And all that I thought was really intriguing, and I actually felt that a couple of characters thought Dawn came across great. I really enjoyed watching her, and I will watch the Dawn show. And I thought both Andrew and Xander, these were episodes where they kind of transitioned to, okay, they're not actually actively annoying me, they're just in the house, Yeah. I found them much. I thought that their edges had really been sanded down in this episode.
Yeah, and what I'd say as well is that the potentials actually are reasonably good fun in this episode. They work well as a team of like chattery young women, which is good fun. Though I really did not like when Rona
as in Miss.
Yeah, so you're right. Rona suggests that they're all 15, because it was like, Kennedy definitely isn't. Please, Kennedy cannot be.
She can't be 15.
No, she's not, and I think that's maybe clarified later on. But I don't think she is. But I definitely think that. I think the potential is just like have a good banter between them. Like mostly, I still do not like Vi at all. I really dislike Felicia.
Is it just because like is it just a thing where like she's meant to be liked because it's Felicia Day, so you're like I don't like her? I
really hate that style of acting, which is like they think they're a Phoebe Buffay character, but in fact they are a Monica.
What? We should decolonize our references and transfer all our friends' references to Seinfeld references, I think, going forward.
Yeah, well, she really thinks she's Elaine, but she's actually in Elaine.
Yeah. We can't get into talking about Seinfeld, but like
the
contrast between it and Friends and the amount of queer content in Seinfeld of all things, that is just better. Anyway, look, What I will say,
we're on season 5 now, and like just like we've been powering through it because we've never watched it before, and it's so good. Go watch Seinfeld if you haven't watched it before. Even though if it feels like a bit clunky and weird at the start, it's really, really fucking good.
And I know this might be an incredibly lukewarm take for a lot of people, but like we are not the only Irish people who have discovered Seinfeld since it's come to Netflix. You know,
really?
It's kind of, it's having a bit of like a Seinfeld renaissance. But what I will say in Felicia Day's defense, I think this is a very prevalent character in this area of television.
Yeah.
And I think that she plays the role she's given well. Do you know what I mean? I don't think it's... I think this is what she
I have nothing against the woman.
She was asked
as a person.
This is what she was asked to do.
I don't have anything against the woman as a person, and I'm sure there's some like element here of misogyny, of just like annoying girl thing maybe going on in my brain. Who knows?
No, there is an element of it just being kind of like, because like we also didn't necessarily like these people in real life when we were that age. So I think
you see, that's it. I really hated this person in real life when I was that age.
But we still follow them on Twitter.
Yeah. Oh god. Anyway, so yeah, I agreed. Like Andrew definitely feels more fun in this episode where he's like, I can't wait for us all to go bar hopping, and they're like, you're not coming with us. And he was like, oh no.
It's like he's getting his first taste of being the gay best friend.
It really is,
because he's only hung out with his weird straight friends from high school. It's literally what's happened to him, and he's now getting to be like the completely innocuous. Like, what's the word I'm looking for? It's not infertile, but just like neutral, like person in the corner. Yeah. He is infertile.
I mean, who knows? But yeah, no, I think the other person I thought did quite well in this episode was no, I have nothing. Speaking of potentials, Joel, what do you think that they're kind of coming to represent in this season? Because like obviously the Buffy potentials Dawn dynamic is quite highlighted in this episode. So Buffy has a very clear role and she's kind of disappearing into it. You have a couple of moments of genuineness where she's talking to Clem, where she's like interacting with Spike, but for the rest of it she really is acting her field marshal self.
Yeah, I think to take it to like a more serious note in some ways, like as much as this is textually what's happening, I think also subtextually, the potentials as a device speak to legacy building in communities. And one of the principles of the whole Slayer thing was that they weren't able to communicate with each other, and they couldn't really share knowledge. And where it was like, again, the Slayer knowledge being cast in this way that like feminine spaces and feminist spaces often are, where it's like there's a certain amount of it which is not structural, it's maybe less recorded, that, you know, in that way, but it's more instinctual, it's psychic, it's all that stuff that's passed down. And actually on I think a related aside by bringing it here, I heard a fascinating point the other day, which is how historically when people would be persecuted or ostracized for being, say, in the Catholic Church or in pilgrim times or that kind of thing, for being witches, for being psychic, for being touched by the devil, for all that extrasensory perception, all that kind of stuff, that there's an argument to be made that, and it was often women, you know, it's an argument to be made that it was actually emotional intelligence was the problem there, because you had people and women in these situations who didn't have hierarchical power but were able to intuit things or put things together in a way which was not empirical but which was absolutely valid, like based on people's body language, their, you know, the feeling, you know, the emotions in the room, the, you know, the subtext, all that kind of stuff. Emotional intelligence, we know what it is, but the patriarchal structures are very based on the idea of
logic, structure based,
factual, recordable, and rely on that. So women having any kind of capacity or intuition which couldn't be demarcated by that was a threat, and came across as a ghost has told you this, which I think is like, it's a kernel of a thought, but I think it's an interesting thought. Yeah. And I think with the potentials we're really looking at, you know, Buffy, by having to create this new way of doing things, which will give such a positive future to this huge swathe of society, both women and Slayers, as it's represented. She herself is sublimated by that. Yeah. She loses, but see, the thing is, her role was always going to be to fulfill a greater purpose. She herself was lost. She wasn't going to get to have a life. She was not going to get to have a job and a normalcy or any of that normalcy. But now she's doing the same thing, but for something she's actually chosen to give it to. And I think that's the mechanic that we're seeing there.
Yeah, I think at the same time, to some degree, like, while absolutely the potentials represent like lineage and a distribution of knowledge in a way that is very against the patriarchy, where like, you know, previously you separated all these girls, you taught them to like obey a man, and in this situation Buffy is trying to instill in them like an intelligence and an awareness of their surroundings and a responsiveness, which I think is very smart. I think it's the wrong solution to, like, you know, try to instill it through like kind of like slightly fear, but also by creating herself as being the leader in some ways. And I think the solution that she comes to by the end of the season of distribution of power, where she is no longer the chosen one, and she is in fact like normal, or certainly not normal, maybe not even normal, but like supported and equal. I think that's kind of like a kernel of that is in Dawn's metaphorical role in this episode, where Dawn in this episode has to deal with kind of the challenge that Buffy has at the end of this, or the choice that Buffy makes at the end of the season, which is that distributing and giving power to others, as Dawn does metaphorically in this episode, where she hands the stake to Amanda and says, "Go to it," when she realizes in a moment that she isn't chosen, and she immediately, as Sander highlights, immediately hands over the power and says, and enables another person to do it. I think that's very much a metaphorical reflection of what Buffy does at the end of the season. And Dawn, as always, represents Buffy's potential for like an integration. And for like an acceptance of the like inner child, quotation marks.
And a representation of the Summers blood, which is maybe not as weighed down by a lot of the difficult things that Buffy has to deal with. You know? And I think you're absolutely right. And you make a point last episode where at this point in the season, Buffy often comes to some kind of a conclusion, but with incomplete information. And I think it all flows in the same direction there, where with any of this community building, you have this thing where you're initially replicating the structures. You can't think outside of the structures that you have. So she is to some degree replicating the you know, it's almost like she's saying, what if a Slayer was a Watcher? And replicating the structures she's familiar with. But what it builds towards is this much more collectivist and this much more decentralized thing at the end of the season, which means that the Slayers and the Slayer can never again be cornered and can never be isolated, because the power isn't located in one place. It's
also a very like it's a very traditionally feminist approach to like non-phallocentrism. So feminist theory around the 60s, 70s. And I mean, like, this is kind of quite an essentialist feminist approach. So it's suggesting that like women and men do things differently, which is not necessarily a reading that we would do in a socially appropriate way now. But it's an interesting it's an interesting lens through it to read it. But would suggest that men trend towards single point solutions for things. You know, if you look at it like as a government, it is a head of government, and that is the cornerstone of the power. And it would suggest that, like, especially in sciences, women would trend more towards a multi-pointed solution. So, like, you know, it has parts of all these different things rather than this one central theory. Which, you know, for one thing, I think it's probably true to some degree, because women aren't given a voice in these situations, and when you add more voices, you get more varied like solutions regardless. But I think that like that kind of is seen here, where Buffy is replicating, as you said, the patriarchal structure of she is now a Watcher herself, and the actual solution is to distribute.
100%. I think that's definitely at the time the text is written, and that's kind of where it's moving towards. And I also think it's important to add to that, which is that is a foundational and a basic and kind of part of that kind of feminist theory and that kind of like gender theory. It's also quite, as you say, quite essentialist, and our thinking has moved beyond that, but there's still relevance to it, where even if it's not, and as it's not biologically essential, which is not because it's problematized as it should be by, you know, trans people and genderqueer people and all this kind of stuff,
and intersex people,
but there are elements of it which are socially constructed, culturally constructed. So even if men in no quote unquote aren't essentially quote unquote programmed to behave in this way.
They are rewarded throughout too.
They're rewarded, and the path of least resistance in the Western society we've constructed is this, and that's kind of what this is what you have to work with when you're trying to envision. I actually talk about this. I feel like I'm talking about this in every walk of life at the moment. But how do you even envision something outside of that?
Yeah,
when you have all the templates turn out to actually be within the walls of the same thing.
Yeah. If you look at all the issues around why women are like left out of STEM, which is kind of get into a bit of a girl boss kind of area of feminism, which is never great, but also it's important if in any given field that it is more, well, not any given field. We don't want women billionaires. We want no billionaires. But in terms of,
That's a very good point. Very good way of putting it.
Yeah. But with people in women in STEM, like, like we know for a fact that women are discouraged through the way that we teach all children to avoid mathematics. I'm not sure why I said it like that. Avoid maths and sciences, and instead, and specifically encourage men towards it. And if you think about how extensively maths specifically has these single point results of like equal. You see an equation and you say, the equal marks is you're supposed to say. And that means this, whereas, the actual approach that we need to take to maths is that one of balance. And anyway, that was a very meandering point, but it's pervasive throughout society.
Yeah, the 100%. I think when you're trying to engage with this stuff, you're picking up an armful of sand and then trying to find the right way to scatter it, and I think it's a really good the potential arc is a really good text to at least talk about this through, because
even if it's not handled super great, like in terms of the metaphor.
In terms of what?
The metaphor? I mean, in terms of
No, that's fine. What you said in terms of the metaphor, it's just I thought you said in terms of the banana fort. I was
okay.
is this a thing in season 7 that I don't know about? Yeah. And I think it's interesting because it does make us think as a viewer about how we're in. I was going to say indoctrinated. Okay, maybe it's not too strong a word, but in the opening seasons, to be like, gosh, isn't it great that there's one magic girl who saves the world? Like, isn't it great that girl's allowed to do this and all that kind of stuff, or whatever? And then later on, you have Andrew. I've forgotten what his name is because I actually refer to him as Tucker's brother so often. Andrew being like, what if there was a guy slayer and he was like a real badass with a shotgun or whatever, but you accept what you're presented with early on, and then you have to really through the process of the text, it leads you to deconstruct it, which I think is really interesting. So
the other big point in this episode is the Dawn and Xander conversation, in which when Dawn has discovered that she is not going to be a potential, and it was Manda who the spell was indicating, Xander sees Dawn's pain and sadness and just a quiet resignation of going back to the books and accepting that she is not special. And Xander gives her a speech, and it was an interesting one. It definitely isn't mean or rude, but I do kind of take issue with it a little bit. Mm-hmm. So one of the things, he appropriately bigs her up and says, being not magically empowered is okay, and it's okay to feel bad about the fact that you're not, but also you're good and you're a wonderful person, and that's a good thing to be communicating. But also he says things like they'll never understand how it's harder to be like this. I'm like, Xander, you shithead. Buffy has died twice. Willow watched her girlfriend get killed in front of her and then attempted to destroy the world because of her sadness. Oz painstakingly worked to remove the werewolf from himself. Anya, when she was empowered, committed many acts of murder. It's Xander, it's not harder to fix windows. In fact, it's much easier to fix windows, and the fact that you are centering yourself in the situation of it's way harder actually to be just a normal guy. It's no, it's not harder to be a normal guy than it is to be a woman on whom the fate of the world is on her shoulders. Yeah.
He makes a good broad point, which is that there are challenges there, and that people who are not supernaturally empowered can still be extraordinary. The worthwhile thing there, though, to point out is that he is not the best example of that.
No,
because
Giles is.
Giles is no more empowered than Xander is. Giles uses some magic at some point, as does Xander at some points. He has episodes where he's a fish person or whatever, but like he is definitely a normie. There are examples in Angel of like actually a number of human characters who are not empowered.
Fred, so much more useful than
Fred. Cordelia, for the vast majority of the time, like she has visions, but like for the vast majority of the time, she is relying on her human skills, etc. Cordelia. So like the point is good, but
he could be as useful as Wesley is.
Yes, exactly. Perfect. Wesley's a perfect example as well. But I think the element of that was just textual, because it's a good, like, it's a conversation between the two characters. It's not a statement from God, and the way that he centers himself, I think, is really interesting. And also, it
really reflects the fact that like Xander is so clearly Joss Whedon.
Yeah, and it's like the way even like there is something maybe said there that wasn't intended to be said, which is, even though she is the younger, more vulnerable woman here, or girl at the time, she is like reinforcing him to a bit, being like, oh, maybe Xander, you're actually the one who sees everything and all this kind of stuff. Like, she's showing more emotional she might be vulnerable in this particular moment and upset in this particular moment, but she is stronger than he is. And I also think you should never neg people in those kind of conversations where it's like, you know what, you are ordinary, or no, what does he say? You're not special, you're extraordinary. It's like, yeah, but for a bit there she thought you were just saying she wasn't special. So like I know there's like a certain like turn of phrase to this, but I think it's a good conversation because it introduces very valuable points, but it is also true to the characters. I think that holds absolutely true. It's just, I'm sure there's a certain tendency to hear Xander and be like, this is like an unimpeachable statement that he's made. I think it's not. It's
well written though. The dialogue is like, it flows very naturally and it feels like a momentous and good moment. And it's good. I saw a couple of like, we'll rush through a couple of like last points before we finish up here, but like I saw a couple of people refer to Buffy's actions in this episode as being similar to the Watchers in terms of doing the cruciamentium.
Okay, now you've confused me. I get it. I think that there is an editing issue here where it's not clear that the girls were safe. I think they set it up.
It seemed like they ran off, but clearly Buffy and Spike were outside the crypt waiting to like jump in, for one thing. For another thing, she whipped them with weapons, and she didn't remove their powers, which they have some potential strength.
Yeah, which is literally the whole point of the scene with Amanda and Dawn, is that Dawn has many abilities, but she doesn't have the reactions and the combat intuition that Slayer does. Amanda, who is like, his whole thing is that she plays, it's not even in the band,
she's not in band, no, she's in something else. She's in
show choir or something like that. She naturally knows how to, like, she can naturally feel the charge of fighting the vampires. So it's very different to put four potentials with natural dormant abilities, weapons, in a controlled circumstance, than like drugging an 18-year-old and throwing her in with a serial killer.
No, they're very different situations, I think. And also being like aware that you can like interfere at any time to stop it, which the council were very much not going to do.
But I get it. It did kind of read like they were just saying, okay, well, we've plenty more where you came from.
I thought the dramatic moment of Dawn like kind of acting out and then failing at some of Buffy's instructions for the potentials, where Dawn, like, meanwhile Buffy is like monologuing about here's what you do, or here's the only ways that you can stay alive. Dawn is kind of acting them out and like being resourceful, but then also failing by making a mistake. I was like, that's interesting. I'm not really sure what you're trying to say here.
But I hear you trying to say it.
Other interesting things, Spike is kind of acting as a loyal henchman to Buffy in this episode. It's an interesting role and I think it's good. I think Spike as the second in command to Buffy's commander role is actually a reasonably good casting for him.
I did have a question over how, again, within the muddled mechanics of his chip, how he can, like, I know that his reason for attacking them is not to hurt them, it's to train them, but he does hurt them in the course of doing it.
He twists her arm and he doesn't,
and he nearly bikes them, or at least there's an element of like rough and tumble. So anyways,
I was thinking, is the chip turned off at this point? But no, he does get it removed though at some point in the season, right?
Yeah, at some point I think Riley off screen has to have it removed. She has to make a choice whether to fix it or because it was causing him neurological pain, to fix it or remove it, and she trusks him and removes it basically.
Willow is using magic in this episode in a casual and intelligent way, and I think it's a nice return to I felt like it was an easy transition into her being like, oh, I can do this and it's not a big deal, and that's kind of how it goes for the rest of the season, is that she has like that temptation to be like bad or whatever, but she's using it for good. That's cool. And then the other thing is that Anya, I think quite appropriately, makes a joke when they're saying, oh, because you have that summer's blood. And Anya's like, or summer's blood or whatever. Willow says that. And Anya says, yeah, I never really got that. Like, which I think really reflects the fact that, like, yeah, no one really got that.
Yeah. Because I think I always read it as because they are blood relatives, but they actually literally mean she
was made out of Buffy's
part
blood.
of Buffy.
Yeah, I know.
That they could be testing potentially and have the same blood or something.
I don't know. Anyway. Okay. Should we move into the dusting, Joe?
Yeah, absolutely.
Great. So some Buffy bits for you. Sarah Hagen, who plays Amanda, she also plays Millie in Freaks and Geeks. She is...
Is this why you were thinking about Freaks and Geeks recently?
There were a couple of things that came up that made me think of Freaks and Geeks. There was that list of best TV shows that you were reading out of, that Buffy came in 46 or something.
It was a terrible list.
It was a terrible list. I think Lost and Babylon and Battlestar Galactica came above Buffy.
No, above it was like literally like, I don't know, like Community or something like that. It was something really like...
Yeah, anyway, there was a bunch of things that were way too high. And Freaks and Geeks got number 10, and I was like, you know what? I totally agree with highlighting it. I'm not sure if it's a top 10 TV shows of all time, but it's stunning. I love Freaks and Geeks so much.
I think people rate it higher because there's so many now stars in it, which is not the same thing as it being good. It's not why it's good.
Exactly, it's not why it's good. It's good because it's a really emotionally intelligent and very tender show. Anyway, but she's in it as Millie, who is Lindsay, I think is her main... Oh God, is that the actor's name? Anyway, the main character is old best friend who does a lot of like kind of like PSA acting out on stage things, and it's really funny. But Rebecca Rand Kirshner, who wrote this episode, also wrote for Freaks and Geeks, and that's why she's come back in this episode. She previously was in the episode, one of the episodes where Buffy is maybe where Buffy is the counselor, and she's returned here because of Rebecca Rand Kirshner's suggestion. The potential Chloe has mysteriously disappeared for this episode. She was the one who had the kind of like, she was kind of dressed yeah, exactly, quite emo-y. As a final note, I really enjoyed Clem coming back and Buffy's comfort with Clem. I just think it's a lovely relationship. Yeah. Do you have any other
there's a few things I noticed which I enjoyed. I thought it was interesting that Rona, when they were doing the training, said that, you know, the black girl always got to die first, which is an interesting line to give to your character, which is both astute and of the era, but also like isn't quite aware of the fact that you don't have many black characters on your show. Yeah. I thought a lot of the Slayer general stuff was as in like Slayer field marshal stuff was interesting when she said, you know, about how the vampire's instinct is to hunt, to kill, to stay alive, so understand his instinct but trust yours and all that kind of stuff. This is a very minor point, but the punching bags, I know it's their a well-known brand, the punching bag, which is Everlast, but they've had a couple of the letters rubbed out, and I wondered if that was intentional or not. Yeah. It's interesting. Once again, they've very much framed, because the first predominantly manifests as women. Yeah. By virtue of the fact that it's reflecting, you know, many of the main characters. But they consistently refer to the first as he, or as Buffy says in this, he, or more appropriately, it is doing X. You know? Yeah. So I think that's an interesting thing I never really thought about, is like what is the gender implication of the struggle within the first, you know, and the trouble it's causing, which I want to come back to. We have Kennedy saying that she doesn't like the feel of wood in her hand, which is like, okay. Yeah, no, so someone's like, no, I really like the feel of wood in my hand, and she says, lost me there. Yeah. A couple of good quotes as well. I liked when Andrew was being bullied by Buffy for having killed people, and he was like, oh, I hate my free will. That was a good line. And like Michelle Trachtenberg is very funny. Like when she said, are you sure it's the spell heard you correctly? It could have said potential sailors. I do like the sea. It was also enjoyable. And the whole presentation of the demon bar, like literally like demon bar is like a gay bar but for demons. Yeah. But it's like, I don't know what to do with that. Yeah. No. And then we see Clem from behind as he opens his face and lets out a logo of evil snakes or something. Yeah. It was just like, I don't think that tracks with any demon morphology we've seen before. So should we do some fashion notes? Please. Okay. So
I thought that Molly looked fucking disgustingly awful in this episode.
Brian.
She's wearing a tartan skirt, which can work great, but then she's also wearing striped socks that are pink and black. They're knee high, and she just looks awful. There's ways you can wear that these days that look great, but that just looked so bad. I hated it. I think she shouldn't have worn it. I just a note that Michelle Trachtenberg looks so great when she opens her eyes really wide, which I don't think is a fashion note, but whenever she looks really scared, I was like, God, she's such an expressive face. It's incredible. I also really like Dawn's go faster stripes on her jacket, and she has a nice blue jacket. And yeah, she didn't have a huge amount of other fashion notes, except for I liked Xander's check shirt. It just looked nice, and it actually wasn't crazy.
I also enjoyed that the demons dress wear whenever they're in, like, again with this, like, is it demons or is it gay? They kind of dress them vaguely like they're in leather, or just something which is kind of suggestive of like some kind of like underground scene. Except Clem, who always dresses like a peasant in a medieval low rent medieval film. So we move on to the death count.
Death count, please.
So we have some procedural deaths in this episode. We have one vampire staked by the potentials off screen, 3 harbingers killed in the school, one stabbed by Buffy, one stabbed by Spike, and one snapped by Buffy. And then we have the vampire impaled by Amanda on, I want to say, a flagpole, because every classroom has one. And actually, I think it was coincidental. It was impaled up against a sign which said something like, "Prepare now to prevent mistakes later," but all you could see was steak when he was actually killed.
That's cool.
So that's the death count. And will we give it a rating?
Yeah, please. Could you give me a rating there, Joel?
I could give this episode 8.9 internal face snakes.
Okay.
Which is a reasonably high rating, but I thought it was one of my favorite episodes of the season so far. I thought that the potential stuff was well articulated, added to the lore, added to the character development. I do like this thing of Buffy trying hard to be essentially a watcher and not being quite the right thing to do. And I thought that the Dawn-centric elements, I think she really added a lot to it. It was really engaging. I had a lot to say, and I thought it was cohesive as an episode, and more in the vein of what I think of when I had an image of season 7. So I'd say 8.9 internal face snakes.
Cool. I'm going to give it 8.1 potential sailors out of 10. I really like the potential stuff. I really like the Dawn stuff specifically. The Xander stuff sat wrong with me to some degree, and also Buffy's behavior in these episodes just isn't a huge amount of fun. If you get me, like, as our lead main character who we love, who is sparkly and silly and funny so often in the show, I think she just lost that to some degree, and she does lose that quite a bit in this season. I think just it makes it a little less enjoyable. But overall, very good episode in lots of different ways. 8.9, very high, Joel.
Yeah, I think I'm just getting generous in my old age as a podcaster. But it always gets a bit of a bum for me because I just don't know it very well. So it's like it's always exciting to learn new things with the characters.
Of course,
after 20 years.
Should we move into Cordelia Chase?
So we're on the Cordelia Chase is Calvary, which is Calvary, which is a continuation of the Angelus imprisonment arc. Probably one of the stronger ones. So there's a few things that happen here. By hook and by crook, we have that Lila, who is being on the run since Wolfram Hart has been destroying the sewers, comes to see Angelus, try to make a deal with him. Angelus continues to provoke the crew and put on pressure points around Gunn and Freg's dissolved relationship, Gunn's murder of the professor, the fact that Wesley and Lila have been sleeping together. And I think it works quite well in a couple of ways. One, eventually Angelus kicks out.
Lila lets him out. Oh, sorry. Yeah,
Lila attempts to let him out, but what it actually comes down to is that they believe they've managed to do a ritual to re-ensoul him. And he does a convincing impression of Angel, essentially, and then gets out on that basis. And then he tries to stalk through. He tries to hold up the act for a little bit. Tries to stalk through the city. The city is in such chaos that he can't really cause chaos himself, and comes back to
the hotel.
The hotel to harass them further. And yeah, it works in a couple of ways. Angelus is focused and very menacing throughout the episode. He says a lot of heinous things, but I do think that they work in the sense that they're not gratuitous, that they are heinous in the way the character is heinous. Yeah.
Yeah, I don't know, that one line. So and this is a trigger warning for sexual assault kind of commentary, but there is a point where he says he's going to rape Fred to death, which is just, I mean, I don't know if there's ever a situation, especially in this kind of like slightly teeny show, that you need to write a line like that in. And like, it certainly wouldn't happen today. And maybe that's indicative of like an unwillingness to make your like heinous characters like bad. But
there's also a line which is is a racist line, which he says to Gung, which he says something that for the first time in his life he wasn't dark enough for something. Yeah, and like these are horrible things, obviously, but I feel that they are used judiciously in this episode. I think it's a very as far as I can say that I think it's a very thin line, and I don't like hearing them. But I didn't think it was out of character for what they were trying to portray. But you're right, it is a lower tone than you would usually get on this show. Yeah. But I think all the stuff of him pretending to be Angel to get out, and then us knowing that he's actually Angelus, and then the menace around that, Dave Boreanaz as Angelus, as Angel, and those kind of layers. It is the epitome of that kind of very dangerous supervillain monster trapped, and that one wrong step means that he's going to like get you. Yeah, which I really enjoy, and I find quite spooky a lot of the time. I thought the dynamics of him not really knowing how he fit in and how he could actually cause chaos, because he likes to be the main. That's eventually what they play on here, is he wants to be the main villain. Yeah, was good. And actually, I thought Lila was great throughout the episode. Because at the end of the episode, she is murdered by Cordelia, possessed by Jasmine. Yeah, it is a bit of a bittersweet note, because I always thought this Lila's actor was actually really good. I agree, with the material she's given, and this is presented as if she's going to be, because Wolfram Hart has been destroyed, she's like Andrew, she's going to be taking and added to the crew as kind of a reformed villain, and it's like she's killed, and there's a shock factor of why us find out that Cordelia is the villain essentially. But yeah, it's a waste, I think. And then the plot wise, we have this like real Deus Ex Machina, which is the Beast makes it. I don't know if you even saw this. The Beast makes a knife out of his own bones, which he's going to present to his master. We find out he has a master in this episode as Cordelia, but eventually that knife is a thing that can kill him. So,
is that the knife that she uses to kill
yes,
Lila?
It is,
I didn't notice that at all. When did he pass it over to her?
There's like a scene where he's presenting it to someone, and then we see her with the knife later on.
I didn't notice that at all.
Yeah, it's not great conveyed, and it's funny because in the dream scenario that makes Angel lose his soul, there's meant to be this Deus Ex Machina sword, which is the only thing that can pierce his hide. And go like, but that was too easy. But that is kind of just what happens in the end. Yeah. But I thought in terms of episode by episode, good portrayals. Yep. Good acting. High stakes. And some great Dave Boreanaz as Angela's content. So I think 8.
I'm feeling an 8.
8 famous gestures. I feel comfortable with that.
My only issue is again the messy awfulness around Cordelia, like, and Jasmine. Just like it doesn't sit together well at all. Knowing the twist that she is not who she is, and also they've kind of already like spilled their load on that. Like previously in the season, they're like kind of like already said, oh, there's something going on with Cordelia, which is that she is evil now. But she acts good sometimes in this season. It's just like, what the fuck's going on? Like, it doesn't work.
I think I've said this before, and I think I've said this to you a lot while we're watching it. But there is no through line in Charisma Carpenter's acting as directed. That makes sense if it is either Cordelia under some kind of psychic dampening or possession, or fully possessed throughout. It doesn't line up. No. And it's never, if it's meant to be that sometimes she's possessed but other times she's Cordelia, when she is herself, she's not herself, you know, so it just doesn't really, she's flattened out in such a tremendous way. Anyway, 8 failed feminist gestures for this episode, and next week we'll watch more Buffy.
Which is the episode which we know the name of, but we're not going to find it now.
Because it's a secret. So thanks so much for joining us. We hope you enjoyed. Great to have you with us. If you enjoyed this episode, please. If you enjoyed this episode, please tell your friends. Tell the gay comic relief character you have tied to a chair in your house. And we will see you next time on Buffy Boys.
See you. Bye.